Power, politics, ethics, and mission. What would Jesus have to say about our culture today? Let's chat. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Doing good.
Good.
I'm excited about this new series that
Yeah,
we
me
have
too.
going on.
Yeah.
Christ and culture.
Yeah.
This is one that we've done before,
Yeah.
but I hear that we have some updates this time around.
Yeah. Culture changes rapidly, and so
it does.
there's things that we should address that maybe we didn't quite address before. Not that you always need to get into all the particulars, because this is a series about teaching us how to engage and think, not here's all the things you should think, right?
Right.
So it's how do we process and come to a faithful conclusion, as opposed to here's all my opinions that you should agree with, right?
Right.
So it's not that you need to get every possible, outcome or idea, but using certain examples as that are real life examples to get a feel for, okay, how do we process through these waters we're swimming in? Yeah.
Well, speaking of real life examples, let's just, go with a hypothetical here. How would we go about talking about an unnamed political figure that uses AI to impersonate a messiah, for instance? I don't know, just random thought.
You know what? That's actually something I have been thinking a lot about, because within, the span of a couple of days, we had a California politician have to drop out of the race because of allegations of sexual misconduct and maybe worse, maybe sexual assault, right? And I was pleased that most people on that side of the aisle were like, yeah, get out of the race and resign. And yet there were still some saying, no, don't drop out. I back you all the way. And I'm like, oh, no.
That's not good.
And I was pleased when the president... Now, I was not pleased when the president posted himself as Jesus on social media, don't get me wrong, but I was pleased with how many people who have been faithful supporters of his said, no, this is not okay. Because a lot of times we just want to back our team, right? And still shocked at how many people defended it or excused it or tried to explain it away. Including, the defense that, he said himself that he was being a Red Cross doctor.
Right.
So I would I would encourage anybody that if you want to see if there's any, if that excuse carries water, go to ChatGPT and ask it to make an AI generated picture of yourself as a Red Cross worker, and then ask it to make an AI generated picture of you as a Christ-like healer, and see which one resembles it more. Right. And I also want to say, if me talking about this makes you feel uncomfortable and defensive, that's part of the problem. And so, to get back to your original question, I'm disheartened when we can't tell the truth because we have thrown our whole selves into a political movement, right, left, or center, right? If you can't criticize, especially as Christians, we're called to hold ourselves accountable. Yeah. And so when we put someone in power and say, this is the person I believe in to lead us, it is actually our responsibility to hold that person accountable, not the people who didn't support him, right? or her, because this is not a one person or one office issue. Yeah. We have to recognize that, and I'm going to talk a lot about this on Sunday, we have to recognize that there are ways in which we can partner with our culture in the political realm, in education, in all sorts of ways that are part of our culture. And there are all sorts of ways that we can't. I can't go there with you. What you're asking me is to violate my conscience and my commitment to Christ. And you should not find too comfortable a home in any political movement, because Jesus will not fit in the agenda of any of these movements. It doesn't mean there aren't ways in which those movements seem to partner with or be in line with the teachings and life of Christ. But there are many ways in which they don't, and we have to be honest about that. And so it takes discernment, I think, is the bigger picture, is that we don't just accept anything that culture gives us, and we don't just knee-jerk reject everything that culture gives us. Yeah. Everything has to be discerned. And so what often, people who talk like I do on these things get accused of. We get accused of being a centrist. We get accused of being people who don't want to take a stand. And actually, what I am often doing is taking a stand against the whole thing. And what I mean by that is I'm given one binary choice over here and one binary choice over here. And I'm like, actually, I don't think either of those choices are wise.
Right.
I'm making a different choice altogether. And people are saying, oh, that's a cop-out. You're not making a choice. I'm like, I am. I just don't think you have the answers we're looking for, right? And so everything has to be discerned, and not discerned in the rules of the culture, not discerned through the lens of left versus right politics, but discerned through the lens of Jesus, Christ crucified. That's what Paul teaches us, that is the lens through which we look through all of these things for the Christian. And then we have to decide then how can I, maybe even should I participate in this, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Let's jump into your first two messages of the series. It's power and politics, and those are kind of intertwined, but they're also distinct. How would Jesus interact with our culture when it comes to power and politics?
Yeah, I think he would stay distant enough from them so that he could prophetically speak to them. Often we get so wrapped up in cultural things that we don't have enough distance to see good, bad, wise, unwise. And you notice that, amongst Jesus's followers were people from all different cliques, right? Various different political and religious points of views. And he never talks to them through the lenses of those points of views. He talks to them through a kingdom lens. And so often, Jesus is presented with very difficult questions about power. And he almost always asks a better question. Instead of giving an answer and playing by the rules of the question asker, he's saying, what if that's not the question to be asked at all? What about this? And oftentimes those questions send a very large message. And so I think that in the same way that in his time, he just didn't fit neatly into anybody's box that they wanted to put him in, and he stood far enough away from those things so that he could correct and critique and invite people out of their little bubble and into a bigger vision for what the kingdom of God is. And that's necessary for the church to do today as well, that we whether it be money, which is a big area where power lies, and a major idol of our culture, whether it be the political realm where power exists, wherever power exists, like we have to be able to be, in and not of the world. And what that means is we don't go like the Essenes of Jesus' day just went and lived in caves and didn't want to interact with culture at all. It was too corrupted. Let's just get away from it. And Jesus doesn't do that, and he explicitly tells us we're not to do that. But he also tells us don't be corrupted by the world. Don't just jump in and take on all of their assumptions. Don't just become totally engulfed in the culture. Be in the world, but not of the world. Discern these things. Stay far enough away that you can not be trapped in it, and that you can see clearly to correct, to invite people into a bigger way of seeing the world.
Yeah, that's good. It's kind of like you're swimming in the water. You're not drinking the water, right? You're not letting it go in.
So one example, and I said this the last time we did a series like this, and I'll say it again on Sunday, is turn off the cable news and go love your neighbor. That's what Jesus would say. You're being distracted by something that person on your screen is telling you is of ultimate importance. And Jesus would say, I already told you what's of ultimate importance. Love God and love your neighbor. So why aren't you doing that? Turn off the noise and love your neighbor. You don't change the world by sitting in an echo chamber and doom scrolling on the internet or watching YouTube people who are telling you who your enemies are supposed to be. Jesus says we'll change the world by loving our neighbor, one disciple at a time.
We'll talk about mission in just a minute here and what that looks like practically for all of us. But let's talk about ethic for a second. Like, we have this idea of what a Christian ethic is. I think that informs our politics a lot of the time. And it's also very important for a lot of people who are vaguely familiar with Christianity. Right. They think it's an ethical structure primarily. Right. And, well, Jesus taught us to do good things, so let's do good things. So I don't really need Jesus because I can just do good things, right? Yeah. So let's unpack the ethical stuff of this series.
Yeah, I think, again, that's where I want to make a couple things clear so that people don't try to pin me into some like philosophical camp that I don't sit in. I don't think ethics are relative, meaning I think there are true values that are universally true. I also think how those ethics get applied are relative because cultures change constantly. Let me give an example. Well, let me give a couple of examples, and then let me talk about what I don't mean, because I think that's helpful too. What it means to love my neighbor 100 years ago in the U.S. is very different than what it means to love my neighbor now. Because 100 years ago in the United States, my neighbor would have been just like me. The world was segregated in such a way that, like, we were in our places. And Jesus would have spoken into that culture and said, you're actually missing your neighbor. It's not just the person who lives next door to you. It's the Samaritan. Or the person laying on the side of the road that we walk by, but the Samaritan stopped to help. You're actually missing the neighbor love that I'm calling you to. And we're going to get into that at some point in the series. Today, it looks different because my neighbors are from very different cultural backgrounds from me, and to my literal neighbors. And so there is a wider gap that needs to be bridged in order to truly love my neighbor and demonstrate the love of Jesus to them. And that's kind of the question at the heart of the person who's questioning Jesus when he says, love your neighbor. Like, well, who's my neighbor? And Jesus wants to make it clear, even the person you think is your enemy is your neighbor, right? And so, it may look different because the conversations I'll have with my neighbor versus 100 years ago are different. But the same ethic applies. The expression of it might change. Well, depending on what my neighbor needs, the expression of the love of Jesus looks different, right? Anyway, the other piece of that is that there's been so much put on cultural norms and preferences that get lumped into the ethical category. So, for example, 50 years ago, if I got up and preached a sermon and I wasn't wearing a suit, people would have taken that as an ethical violation, right? But that's cultural. Yeah. And that's got little to do with what it is I'm there to do. Yeah. What I'm wearing, as long as it's not some sort of crazy distraction, right?
No ripped jeans still. Can't do that.
No comment, because I don't care about that. But and so it doesn't mean I just say, well, I think that's stupid and I don't care about your opinion. I don't want to ever minimize what somebody feels, right? Because we're all shaped in different cultural contexts. And at the same time, for me, wearing what I wear on mostly a daily basis, I'm not wearing a button-up shirt today because my son has a baseball game. But that's what I typically wear on a daily basis, is a button-up and some jeans or khakis or whatever. Yeah. And it's important to me to actually be myself, and to let people know when they come into our church, you too can be yourself. You don't have to change, what you look like or whatever to come and meet with Jesus and be a part of this family. And yet, that's a different motivation. It's, to me, neither of those questions, suit or no suit, is ethical at all. But it's shaped by culture. Yeah. And so all of that to say, we have to be really careful when we talk about Christian ethics, because they're not as easily discerned as we like to think they are, because Jesus doesn't speak into everything, especially things that an ancient mind, you know, could not have foreseen, right? I love when people are like, what would the founding fathers say if they were here today? I'd be like, well, they'd scream in fear when they saw a giant garbage truck go by, because that would be a terrifying development that they weren't ready for.
Right.
And I would say it's a joke, but like, we have to try to discern, and it's not an easy one-for-one cultural, like, cut and paste. It's, we got to do a deep dive into the original context and try to see if there's an ethic in there that applies to today. And sometimes it's just not that obvious. So,
yeah. Are we going to tackle like big ethical issues in the series at all, or is that more of a big questions sort of thing?
Yeah, I think that like, I think more it's training ourselves to discern, right? And also like to hold not our convictions loosely, but like trying to enforce our convictions on other people. Let's be careful with that.
Okay.
Because again, to answer like some not all, but some big modern ethical questions that we're not discussed in the scriptures, like we have to be careful with the conclusions we come to when we read the scriptures. So more, let's train ourselves in how to do that well, and then be humble as we do it, because we could be wrong.
Yeah.
Right.
It's kind of a cop-out, but okay. I'm kidding.
Well,
I'm kidding. I'm just quoting back to
one
you.
of the things that, like, there's no way to preach that without me just saying, here's my opinion.
Right.
And I'm happy to do that in conversation. Yeah. I'm even actually happy to do some of that here in this space and say, here's what I think. I submit it to you. I don't claim to have all of the right answers on everything. This is just how I've processed things and come to. The pulpit is not the place for me to do that, right? And so I'm very protective of that. Like, you're never going to hear me get on a soapbox of like, here's what I think, and you should all agree with me. I'm trying to go to the scriptures and say, how do we do this? How do we make sense of the world that we're in, and hopefully give us some tools to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of tools, I know the last thing that we're going to talk about is mission.
Yeah.
Which I think is more of like the practical stuff of like, how do we actually walk in the world and not be of the world, like you were saying. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's a balancing act. And that's kind of the point of this whole thing, is that if everything is to be discerned, how we interact with things needs to be discerned, but it also needs to be centered in what's our job, right? And we've been given the marching orders to make disciples of all nations and to be his witnesses in Judea, Samaria, to the ends of the earth. And we are called to live on mission in a way that blesses people and helps them to understand who Jesus is and why in him is true and everlasting life. Right? So if that's our mission, well, then that should shape not only our motivations, but then how we go about things. And so we have to do this balancing act of, like we talked about before, like, we can't just be swept up in the culture completely. We can't reach a culture that that we are so immersed in that we can't help people discern what leads to Christ and what doesn't, right? And at the same time, we love John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life. We should always, I think, bring about verse 17, which he did not send his Son in the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through it. So if God has not condemned the world, then we don't get to either.
Yeah.
We don't get to take God's place and condemn the world when he has not condemned the world. He wants to redeem and restore all things.
Yeah.
So our posture can't just be like, sure, let's all do whatever we want, and that's great, and blah, 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 and everything's true, and, you know, like, never have like distinctives and clarity on what it is we believe.
Yeah.
And then the flip side is we can't just sit in judgment and condemn because God is not asking us to do that. He's asking us to work towards restoration and reconciliation.
Yeah.
So again, this is where it becomes tricky, and we need to discern everything that comes our way. So, you know, in there are times early in my faith where, you know, I felt a strong, like, pull to, like, is it okay if I listen to the same music I listened to before? And certain Christians would say, no, that's all from the devil. And I was like, I don't see what's demonic about it. It's a love song the guy wrote for his girlfriend. Okay. And then on the other side, you got people who are like, yeah, who cares? Don't, like, it's just music. Who cares? And that is an example of, like, there's nothing that's just a thing.
Right.
And it's also not everything that doesn't explicitly, like, worship Jesus. Not everything that doesn't explicitly worship Jesus is demonic, right?
Yeah. It sounds like kind of the through line of the series is, like, binary thinking is not helpful.
It's not. Yeah. It's not. And there is music that I used to listen to that I still don't listen to. And because I noticed that it was fueled by a kind of unrighteous anger that I don't want a part of my life anymore.
Yeah.
And, you know, I used to think, oh, it just gets me going. And when I go for a run, it pumps me up and all this stuff. And then I'm like, why do I want to say these words that I don't like? You know, why do I want to say these things that don't feel true to who I am now?
Right. I don't really believe the message of this song anymore.
And I just was a little disturbed by it. And then there's other stuff that I'm like, oh, I remember this. This was like junior year of high school. This was my jam. This is fine, you know. And but everything has to be discerned, and that's a very, like, low bar, the music thing. Right. For some, maybe some people think it's more important than I do, but that's a low bar of, like, how we do discernment. But everything has to be done. Like, we can't just accept people's conclusions without inspecting them. And I think that is, like you said, the through line. This it's either A or B thinking is usually unhelpful, because oftentimes it's C or even Z, like things we haven't even thought of before. Yeah. Or it's like, hey, I wonder sometimes if God even cares about this conversation we have. Well, I wonder if sometimes if he thinks we're wasting our time, right. You know, and so we just need to discern these things and do it in community. It's not just about what I think. Do it with, like, good and helpful resources and information sources, and do it humbly. That, to me, is the key to all of it. If we don't do it humbly, we will just dig ourselves further into what we already believe, because we then are the authority, right? If I make myself the authority, all I'm looking for is ammunition to like, you know, throw back at somebody else so I can protect my little fortress of belief. And we expect other people to be open to hearing our ideas, but if we close ourselves off to hearing their ideas, then we're not actually discussing things in good faith. But when we approach these things humbly, you know, one of the things I learned from David Fitch, my academic mentor, was this phrase, like, I humbly submit this to you. I'm not telling you have to think it. I'm open to your thoughts and interaction and pushback, but here's where I'm at, and I humbly submit it to you. Let's go from there, right? And I think if we can posture ourselves in that way, we'll do really well, not only to seek God's heart, but also find ways of connecting with the world that actually drives mission in a positive and healthy way.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.